Thank you for joining me during these live internet studies. It's an hour and a half long study. My name is Arubin Lyman Hanavi. This is a brand new year, January 2024. Nice to have all of you who join me week after week, month after month, and now I can say year after year. We've crossed over into a brand new year, and I'm excited about the studies that we've been working on. In the hour and a half long time frame that I've given over to these studies, this live internet platform, the first 1 hour is given over to this topic of eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events, where we are looking at basically, we're working our way towards the book of Revelation. If you can see on your screen right now, I've got this topical index parked out in front of you. There's 18 topics right now, and we're in the yellow part where it says Topic 9, Yeshua's Olivet Discourse, Part 2. And we're finishing up this look at Matthew chapter 24. I'm really basically at the point where I'm almost ready to just draw it to a close and jump right into the next three topics, which are the rapture views. In the 30-minute study that follows right after this hour-long study, we're dealing with the topic of a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism, where we are challenging one another as Christians, as believers, and yet we've got differing perspectives on God as one, God as three. Is he triune? Is he one, numerically one, like the non-Trinitarians teach? And we've been specifically looking at Proverbs 8:23, where the writer talks about wisdom. Is this Jesus? Is this just personification? And it's not Jesus. And we're looking at those different details. So I hope you can join us. Stay tuned for the entire hour and a half long show. So let's jump into Matthew 24's Olivet Discourse and continue working our way down through this material. We are in a place where we're ready to start looking at this section where Yeshua is telling his disciples about his second coming and the conditions on planet Earth when the time comes for him to return. Of course, he's given us enough details for us to understand that there are going to be a good number of challenges that face everyone on planet Earth, whether you're a believer or an unbeliever, and you need to make a choice. When Yeshua comes and when Yeshua returns, if you're waiting for him to return to make your choice as to whether or not he's Lord, well, then you've waited too long, because the condition on earth is going to be such that it will be very difficult, as I understand it, to with a sense of with a sound mind to make a proper decision, because the stakes are so high as we get closer and closer to Yeshua returning that we've got both good and evil, right, light and darkness, both kind of maturing and coming to a point. We've got Satan, who's going to be cast down to planet Earth at some point, and he's going to be on a rampage and pouring out his wrath against Jews and against Christians and against anyone who doesn't yield to him, take his mark, and recognize that his puppet is God, or what he is going to be claiming to be God, right? Antichrist. And yet at the same time, God is also going to be sending a strong delusion on those who those who have refused to believe the truth when they had the chance, right? Read 2 Thessalonians. And so, or the books of that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. So just like the Bible says in other places, the day of salvation is now. Make your decision now, while it is while the Holy Spirit is making these truths available to us, and your life isn't in danger per se if you make a decision for Yeshua. There's coming a day when if you name the name of Yeshua, you might just lose your head very, very easily, very quickly. So let's look at this study and look at the conditions that Yeshua describes that planet Earth will be like during the times when he's going to make his second approach. So picking up our reading in Matthew 24, starting in verse 36, we're going to read all the way down through verse 41. And then we'll look at the notes that Pastor David Guzik has left for us. And I'm going to try and, like I said, accelerate through some of this. Maybe I didn't tell you that earlier, that I wanted to accelerate. It's because as we get further and further down into Matthew 24, we're finding that essentially the parables are very self-explanatory. The stories that he's giving right now, and there's very little need for me to try and confuse everyone by adding more detail. In other words, sometimes the Bible speaks best for itself. So let's read this. These are our Lord's words. He says, "But about that day and hour no one knows." We've already, let me back up for a second and stop. We've already heard the multitudes of teachings, either from a pastor or from a Bible teacher, a study that we've attended, or reading our own commentaries on this subject, that when Yeshua comes, no one's going to know the day or the hour, so why even have a discussion on eschatology? And there's a measure of truth to that, right? We shouldn't be trying to date set, is the point I'm saying, because Yeshua says no one knows the day or the hour, and if I finish the verse, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. That's verse 36. So taking at face value, nobody knows except God the Father, which that means, at least at the time when Yeshua said those words, when he was here on earth, he himself also didn't know. Whether or not he knows now that he's seated at the right hand of the Father, I can't say for certain that he doesn't know. There's nothing in the Bible that I've found that would prevent him from having gained that information after he sat down next to his Papa. But taking at face value, he doesn't know. So why should I try to pretend that I would know the exact day of the hour? And yet, what we're going to find is that when we're talking about Yeshua's second coming, and I'm working towards this theme, so just bear with me. I'm not going to unpack all of it now, because it's going to really be covered more in the next topics where we're talking specifically about the rapture. But I want to give you at least a bit of a teaser. When we're talking about the return of Yeshua, we're talking about, on the whole, one event, one parousia in the Greek, one coming, one arrival, one second coming, one return. And yet, we're going to find out that there are parts to this return, or aspects, or pieces, or itinerary destinations that are multiple. There are, in other words, there is one return. I don't believe there are two returns. And yet at the same time, there's an aspect of his return that's been given to us in the Bible that is unknowable, like what we just read here. And yet at the same time, and you have to remember that this is all drawn from a lot of the passages in Daniel where time frames were actually given. And we're going to see this a little later on tonight, that there were numbers given to Daniel as far as years and months and days that correspond with the advent, not just of Yeshua, but the bringing in of the kingdom. So that we could almost say that we can know the day when certain things will happen. So, in fact, I'm of the opinion of the understanding that if we want to put our finger on the rapture, then yes, we can't know the day or the hour. But if we're talking about when Yeshua returns to defeat Antichrist and set up his kingdom, if we understand Daniel correctly, then yes, we can know the day. I don't know if we can know the hour, but we can definitely know the day, because days are actually given. So, and it's not just in Daniel that they're given. We find when Yeshua finally gives this revelation to John in the book of Revelation, he repeats the same time frames. And we'll talk about this. Like I said, I'm just tipping my hand a little bit towards you right now so you can see. When I say tip my hand, I'm using like blackjack terminology, right? So let's keep reading what Yeshua has to say here, and also understand that Yeshua is dividing all of humanity into two parts when he begins to give these words to his disciples. And this is going to give the foundation for Paul's writing in the book of Thessalonians, as well as we've got Peter, who's going to also echo the same words of our master, where he uses, both of them, Paul and Peter, use these terminology of the thief in the night analogy, where Yeshua's return is likened to a thief in the night to planet Earth. And yet Yeshua is going to tell us that there are two people groups that are going to witness his return. There are the believers and the unbelievers. And depending on which people group you fall into, the thief in the night analogy has an application for you. So on the one hand, who is it that he's addressing when he says no one can know the day or the hour? Is it all of humanity? In some sense, yes. But as we begin to read what he describes with Noah, and we go back and read Noah, right? Genesis chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8, then you're going to find that in that story, as things progress closer and closer to the flood waters actually beginning, with the rain starting and the ark being shut and such, God actually gives Noah a lot of detail, even to the point where he tells him the day when the waters are going to commence. So, am I saying that we should know the day when the rapture happens? No, I'm not saying we should know the day when the rapture happens. But there are aspects about his second coming where we've got rapture on one bookend and second coming where he establishes his kingdom on the other end, and we'll see this later on as well, where, according to Daniel and according to Revelation, we actually should know the day. And so let's work towards that for a second, okay? In case you guys are confused, and David Guzik picks up on this too. You'll see that here in a moment. So I'm trying to pique your curiosity. All right, you guys, you ready? Here we go. So Yeshua says, no one's going to know the day of the hour, not the Son, not the angels, but only the Father. And then in verse 37, he says, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like. He's going to give us some analogies about how planet Earth is, what the condition of humanity is going to be like. But not just humanity, but we need to know also that he could have been giving us more clues as to go back and read Genesis and find out that wicked humanity was clueless, but righteous humanity, i.e. Noah and his family, they were not clueless. Two people groups being portrayed when judgment falls, right? Just like in the last day, judgment's going to fall on two groups of people. The wicked are going to be unprepared, just like in Noah's day. But the righteous will be prepared, just like in Noah's day. Well, the same should be true when Yeshua returns the second time. For as in those days, Yeshua says, before the flood they were, and then he describes the wicked, eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. So there's your two groups of people. The people who are eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, they're just going about their daily lives. They don't really know about the disaster. They don't really care. According to the book of Hebrews, Noah preached about it, right? He was preaching. He was a preacher of righteousness during that time while he's building the ark. And he was explaining to people what's going on. I'm sure they had dialogues, right? Here he is building this big boat, right in full view of everyone. It doesn't sound like he went off into some secluded area and built the boat. He built it right there in public, in the middle of town square, as it were. And people around him were probably asking him, hey, old timer, what's with the big boat? You going to go fishing? What you going to catch? Right? And he probably explained to them, even though he didn't have all the details until a little later on, but you know, I'm sure he warned them of the impending doom. And they just laughed. They scoffed. They mocked him. Yeah, right. Rain. What is that? What is rain, right? I'm of the understanding that there wasn't rain on the earth during that day. You know, the earth was watered by a mist that came up from the ground. So, you know, he warned them. And so that's the people who just said, nah, we're just going to go about our daily lives. We're just going to do everything according to normal, according to the way we understand life. You know, look out for number one and just take care of business as usual. But Noah was the righteous one whom God forewarned, and he was the one that entered the ark. I'm sure there was room for other people. I mean, there were enough room for the animals, but there should have been room for other people if they would have believed, but they didn't. So those are two groups of people. Yeshua continues and says, and they did not understand, speaking of wicked humanity, they didn't understand until the flood came and took them all away. And we're going to play with this phrase, took them away, because later on, Yeshua is going to talk about that there will be two in the field, and one will be taken, and one will be left. And then there'll be two at the mill. One will be taken, and one will be left. And if we were to borrow the Luke's account, I think it's Luke, might be Mark, we'll look at here in a moment. He also talks about two men being in one bed, and one taken and one left. And the idea is that there are a good number of Bible teachers who point to the idea that the taken here refers to the unbelievers, and the ones being left refers to the believers. And then there are people on the other side of the camp that say that the taken refers to the believers, and the ones being left refers to the wicked. And I'll tell you which view I take here a little later on. So Yeshua continues to say, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. At that time, there will be two men, and here's our verse here. There'll be two men in the field. literally just two in the field. It doesn't say men, but two in the field. One will be taken, one will be left. And then two women, verse 41, will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one will be left. So clearly we have this separation of humanity, just like I was mentioning earlier. That's really the main point of this part of the story is there will be this separation. There will clearly be God marking out who is righteous and who is not, who is ready for judgment and who is to be gathered to him. So we don't have time at this moment, and I'm not going to get into it at this moment, not in detail. I'm going to save that for the raptures talk when we get to the topic. But basically, let's just look at the broad picture here again about how was it in the days of Noah, who's taken, who's left. Let's entertain that a bit. But first, let me jump over to earlier in Matthew and just notice that in Matthew chapter 13, so earlier in the book, Yeshua is talking about this detail of separating people from people. And he gives this analogy, this parable of the weeds among wheat. And so starting at verse 24 of Matthew 13, I'll just read down through some of this really quick. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and left." So now we've got wheat and tares. Verse 26 of chapter 13 of Matthew. "And when the wheat sprouted," that's us, the believers, "when the wheat sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also became evident." So that's the tares. "And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seeds in your field? How then does it have weeds?'" Verse 28, Yeshua says, "And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.'" Of course, this is Satan. And he's going to give the parable explanation a little later on. I'm just reading the parable now. So I'm reading through it fairly quickly. Verse 28, "And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The slaves said to him, 'Do you want us to then go and gather them up?'" So this is a kind of rapture picture that's being described for us. Verse 29, "But he said, 'No, while you're gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them.'" Verse 30, "Allow both of them to grow together until the harvest," which is the end time rapture. "And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers," which we're going to find out are the angels, "'First gather up the weeds and bind them in bundles, then to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." Now, I'm just saying this as an overview right now, but notice that he tells the reapers, which are the angels, to first gather the weeds sequentially and then gather the wheat into my barn. So in this parable, the bad ones are taken out of the way first, and the good is left behind to so that it can be gathered into the barn. That's the sequence. It's just right in front of us, very plain. First, gather up the weeds and bind them, but gather the wheat into my barn second. So if we were to take that chronology, then we would see that the wicked are taken for judgment, and the righteous are left to be protected and gathered and put into the barn. That's the sequence. And just to be sure, when we get down to verse 36 and following, Yeshua gives the parable. "Then he left the crowds and went to the house, and his disciples came to him and said, 'Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field.'" Verse 37, "He said, 'The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world, and as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one.'" It's really nice when Yeshua just gives us the details without any ambiguity, without any equivocation. I just love it. I wish he would have done this in other places, but he doesn't. So here's what we have. And then he says in verse 39, "The enemy who sowed," I think I skipped a word. "And the field is the world, and as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one." So we see, again, these two groups of people, just like we saw in the parable with Noah, or not a parable, but as it was in the days of Noah, and the two out in the field, one will be taken, one will be left, two at the meal, one will be taken, one will be left, etc., etc. So there's a separation. That's what we're talking about, which leads us to the proper understanding in the Bible that there is no middle ground when it comes to salvation. There's no no group of people who are in between. You might have people who are in decision mode, but until they make the decision, they are in an area of grace where God is allowing them to be brought close to his truth. They attend church. They are religious Jews. They're people who have a head knowledge of God. They're people who are friends of believers or family members of believers, etc., but they themselves are not believers. So they are close to the truth. I believe we could call these people in a room that I have come to understand as grace. And therefore, if they make the decision that they don't believe in Jesus as Lord, then in using Paul's terminology in the book of Galatians, they would fall from grace. That doesn't mean they lose their salvation. Rather, they fall out of that area where they can now properly make a right decision for God. They back out, they back off, they back away. Well, we have a lot of people in the world who are like that, but in God's courtroom, they're still unbelievers. So you're either on God's side, you're either for God or you're against him, right? You're either for Jesus or you're against him at default. So there's no in between. There's no people with their feet in both camps where they're half saved and half unsaved. I don't believe the Bible describes that. And these types of parables that we're looking at, I believe, are a good indicator of that truth, that there's just two groups of humanity. You're either saved or you're lost. And at the time of the rapture, Yeshua is going to he's going to snatch away those, he's going to separate again those who are his from those who are not his. But it does get a little more complicated when we get to, say, Revelation chapter, I want to say 8, if I remember, where suddenly we've got a group of people that God seals with his seal of righteousness, but they're not saved. They're just protected from the Antichrist, namely the 144,000. Because in other words, if they were saved, they should have been raptured along with the church group of people that are also in that same chapter, Revelation chapter 8, but they don't get raptured. But we'll talk about that a different day.